Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood at the back of the war room, trying to make himself invisible. The massive chamber aboard the alien command ship buzzed with activity as dozens of creatures from different worlds argued about battle plans. Their voices echoed off the metal walls in languages that hurt human ears. Jake had been standing there for 3 hours, and not one of the alien commanders had looked at him twice. He was fine with that. It gave him time to watch and learn. The Zirathi were the tallest beings in the room. They looked like walking crystals, their bodies made of sharp angles that caught the light. When they moved, they made soft chiming sounds like wind through glass. Admiral Zexthan was their leader, a creature so tall that Jake had to crane his neck to see his face. The Zirathi had ruled space for over 10,000 years, and they never let anyone forget it. The Mogrim were different. They flowed more than walked, their bodies like thick liquid that somehow held its shape. Commander Veltar spoke in wet, gurgling sounds that the translation device turned into words. His species controlled the trade routes between star systems, making them rich and powerful. Then there were the Kavik, who looked like giant insects with too many arms. They clicked and chittered at each other constantly, their black eyes never blinking. Admiral Kethmer was their representative, and he seemed to be doing math in his head, while the others talked. All of these species had been traveling between stars since before humans discovered fire. They had conquered worlds, built empires, and fought wars that lasted centuries. They were the Galactic Defense Coalition, the most powerful military force in known space, and they were all terrified. The holographic display in the center of the room showed a map of their galaxy. Red dots marked where star systems used to be. 27 systems in the past 6 months, each one completely destroyed. No wreckage, no survivors, no clues about what happened. Just empty space where millions of people once lived. The enemy called themselves the Void Hunters, though nobody knew why. They appeared without warning, destroyed everything, and vanished back into deep space. No one had ever seen their ships up close and lived to tell about it. Jake studied the red dots on the map while the aliens argued. There was something familiar about the pattern, but he could not put his finger on it. The attack seemed random to everyone else, but Jake had spent his childhood studying military history. His grandfather had been a Marine, and his father had served in the Navy. He knew that nothing in war was ever truly random. Admiral Zexthan was speaking now, his crystal voice ringing through the chamber. We will meet them at Kepler Junction. With the full might of our combined fleets, 12,000 ships from 6 worlds will show these Void Hunters what happens when they threaten civilized space. The other aliens made sounds of agreement. Commander Veltar's liquid form rippled with what Jake guessed was excitement. Our weapons are superior. Our ships are faster. Our crews have fought in 100 battles. These mysterious attackers will break against our strength like waves against stone. Admiral Kethmer clicked his mandibles together. The mathematics are clear. 4-to-1 odds in our favor. Victory is certain. Jake wanted to speak up, but he had learned to stay quiet. During these meetings, the first time he had tried to offer an opinion, Admiral Zexthan had looked down at him like he was an annoying insect. Your species has been in space for less than 200 years, the crystal being had said. Perhaps you should observe and learn from those who understand warfare. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Jake had done exactly what the Admiral suggested. He observed. He learned. And what he learned worried him. Captain Lisa Park, the human diplomatic representative, sat at the main table with the alien commanders. She was trying to be polite, but Jake could see the frustration in her eyes. Every time she tried to speak, one of the aliens would talk over her or dismiss her concerns with a wave of their hand or tentacle, or whatever they used for hands. Perhaps we should consider alternative strategies, Captain Park said during a brief pause in the alien chatter. The Void Hunters have been successful so far because they are unpredictable. Maybe we should try to be unpredictable too. Admiral. Zekfin made a sound like breaking glass, which Jake had learned was alien laughter. Captain Park, your concern is noted. But we have been fighting wars since before your world had written language. Trust us to handle this properly. Commander Veltar's form shifted in what might have been a nod. Humans are brave, we acknowledge this, but bravery without experience is just foolishness. Leave the planning to those who understand it. Jake bit his tongue to keep from responding. He had been watching these aliens plan for weeks, and their idea of strategy seemed to be pointing their biggest guns at the enemy and shooting until something exploded. It had probably worked fine against other aliens who thought the same way, but the Void Hunters were different. The meeting went on for another hour. The aliens talked about fleet formations, weapon loadouts, and communication protocols. Everything was planned down to the smallest detail. Everything was organized and predictable. Jake made mental notes of every decision, every assumption, every blind spot in their thinking. When the meeting finally ended, the alien commanders filed out in order of importance. The Zirathi first, then the Mulgrim, then the Kavik, and so on. Humans came last as always. Jake and Captain Park walked together toward the transport that would take them back to their own ship. They are not going to listen to us, Captain Park said quietly once they were alone. They have already decided how this battle will go. Jake nodded. They think they are fighting other aliens. Honorable enemies who will play by the same rules they do. And you think the Void Hunters are different? Jake stopped walking and looked back at the command ship. Through the windows he could see the aliens still gathered around their holographic displays, pointing at formations and arguing about tactics. I think the Void Hunters are exactly what their name says they are. Hunters, and hunters do not fight fair. Captain Park studied his face. You have been very quiet during these meetings. Do you have thoughts about what we should do? Jake was quiet for a moment. He thought about his grandfather's stories from old Earth wars, about soldiers who won battles by doing things the enemy did not expect. He thought about the pattern of red dots on the star map and how it reminded him of something he had read about in history books. I think, he said slowly, that we need to start planning for what happens when their plan fails. Because it is going to fail. The Void Hunters have been watching us, learning how we fight, studying our tactics. Kepler Junction is not going to be a battle. It is going to be a trap. Captain Park looked worried. Should we warn them? Jake shook his head. They would not listen. They think they know everything about war because they have been fighting for thousands of years, but they have only been fighting each other. The Void Hunters are something new. They walked the rest of the way to their ship in silence. Jake spent the time thinking about patterns and tactics, about predators and prey, about the difference between fighting for glory and fighting to survive. The aliens were preparing for a glorious battle that would be remembered in their history books. Jake was preparing for a massacre. The battle began exactly as Admiral Zekthon had planned. Jake watched from the observation deck of the Coalition command ship as 12,000 vessels arranged themselves in perfect formation at Kepler Junction. The sight was breathtaking. Even for someone who had seen it during the practice runs, the Zirathi dreadnoughts formed the center line, their crystal hulls gleaming like jewels in the starlight. Each ship was the size of a small city, armed with weapons that could crack planets. Behind them came the Mulgrim heavy cruisers, their flowing metal surfaces rippling with energy shields. The Kavek destroyers buzzed around the formation like angry wasps, quick and deadly. Other species filled out the massive fleet. The turtle-like Gornaks brought their fortress ships, slow but nearly impossible to destroy. The energy beings called the Veltari had ships that looked like captured lightning, beautiful and terrifying. Even the peaceful Ashanti had sent there hospital ships, expecting to treat the wounded after a glorious victory. Jake had never seen so many ships in one place. The fleet stretched across space for millions of kilometers, a wall of metal and energy that seemed unstoppable. The alien commanders stood on the bridge around him, their various forms practically glowing with confidence. "Magnificent, Admiral," Zexton said, his crystal voice filled with pride. "The greatest fleet ever assembled. The Void Hunters will see this and know they have met their match." Commander Veltar's liquid form rippled with excitement. "Our scouts report the enemy fleet approaching. 3,000 ships, just as predicted. They are outnumbered 4-1. Admiral Kethmer clicked his mandibles, and what Jake had learned was the Kavik version of laughter. "Perhaps they will surrender when they see the odds. Save us all some trouble." Jake said nothing, but his stomach was tight with worry. He had spent days studying the sensor readings from previous Void Hunter attacks, and something about those 3,000 ships bothered him. They were too organized, too coordinated. Real fleets had stragglers, ships that fell behind or moved ahead of formation. The Void Hunter ships moved like a single organism. Captain Park stood beside him, equally quiet. She had tried one more time to suggest alternative tactics, but the alien commanders had dismissed her concerns. Now she watched the approaching enemy with the same worried expression Jake felt on his own face. The Void Hunter fleet appeared on the main display, dark shapes against the star field. Their ships were strange, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in patterns that hurt to watch, formations that somehow looked wrong to human eyes. Admiral Zex then opened communications to the enemy fleet. His voice boomed across space, carried by powerful transmitters that could reach across star systems. "Unknown vessels, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to galactic law." The response was silence. The Void Hunter ships continued their approach, their dark forms growing larger on the display. They showed no signs of slowing down or changing course. Commander Veltar's form shifted nervously. "Perhaps their communication systems are different. They may not understand our language." Admiral Kethmer's eyes glittered with anticipation. "It does not matter. Mathematics are universal. They can count. They know they cannot win." Jake wanted to point out that the Void Hunters had been winning for months, destroying everything they encountered. But he kept his mouth shut and watched as the enemy fleet approached. Weapons range. The first shots came from the Coalition fleet. Thousands of energy beams and missiles streaked across space toward the Void Hunter ships. The display lit up like a festival of lights as the most powerful weapons in the galaxy fired at once. For a moment, Jake thought the aliens might be right. The Void Hunter ships were hit by enough firepower to destroy a moon. Explosions bloomed across their formation, like deadly flowers. Then the smoke cleared, and the enemy ships were still there. Their dark hulls showed no damage, no sign that they had been hit at all. The weapons that could crack planets had done nothing. "Impossible," Admiral Zexton whispered, his crystal form flickering with shock. "Our weapons should have destroyed them." The Void Hunters answered with their own attack, and Jake immediately understood why they had been so successful. Their weapons were nothing like the energy beams and missiles the Coalition used. Instead, they fired something that looked like pieces of space itself, dark projectiles that seemed to bend light around them. The Coalition ships had shields, designed to stop energy weapons and physical missiles. They were not designed to stop whatever the Void Hunters were firing. The dark projectiles passed through the shields like they were not there and struck the ships directly. The first, Zirathi dreadnought to be hit, simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, a mighty warship with 10,000 crew members. The next moment there was empty space, not even wreckage left behind. "Report," Admiral Zexton shouted, his voice cracking like breaking glass. "What happened to the bright star?" The communications officer, a nervous Mulgrim, checked his instruments with shaking pseudopods. "Sir, The ship is gone. No debris, no energy signature, no trace that it ever existed. More Void Hunter weapons struck the Coalition fleet. Each hit erased a ship completely, leaving nothing behind. The perfect formation that had looked so impressive began to fall apart as ships tried to scatter away from the dark projectiles. But the Void Hunters had planned for this. As the Coalition ships broke formation, the enemy vessels moved to surround them. Jake watched in horror as the dark ships flowed around the fleeing Coalition vessels like water on stones. "They are hurting us," he said quietly. But in the chaos of the battle, no one heard him. The Coalition communications network was breaking down as more command ships were destroyed. Without central coordination, the different species began fighting their own separate battles. The Zerathi tried to reform their battle line, but half their ships were already gone. The Mulgrim attempted to retreat, but found their escape routes blocked by Void Hunter vessels. Admiral Zexthen was shouting orders that nobody could hear over the static-filled communication channels. Commander Veltar's liquid form was vibrating with panic as he tried to coordinate his scattered fleet. Admiral Kethmer's calculations had become meaningless as the mathematical certainty of victory turned into the reality of defeat. Jake grabbed Captain Park's arm. "We need to get out of here, now." She looked at him with wide eyes. "We cannot abandon our allies." "Our allies are dead," Jake said flatly. "Look at the display. This is not a battle anymore. This is an execution." The command ship shuddered as a Void Hunter weapon passed close by. The lights flickered, and several alien crew members cried out in fear. On the main display, Jake could see the enemy ships moving in perfect coordination, picking off Coalition vessels one by one. Captain Park spoke into her communicator. "All human ships, this is Captain Park. Begin emergency withdrawal. Repeat, all human ships withdraw immediately." The few dozen human vessels in the fleet were small and fast, designed for exploration rather than combat. They had been placed at the rear of the formation, considered too weak to participate in the main battle. Now that positioning saved their lives as they turned and fled toward the jump point. Admiral Zexthen noticed the human ships leaving and turned toward Captain Park with fury in his crystal eyes. "Where are your ships going? The battle is not over." Jake looked at the display, where less than 2,000 Coalition ships remained out of the original 12,000. "Yes, it is," he said quietly. The Zerathi Admiral raised one of his sharp appendages as if to strike Jake, but at that moment, another Void Hunter weapon hit the command ship shields. The impact threw everyone to the floor and filled the air with the smell of burning electronics. When Jake picked himself up, he saw that the main display was showing retreat routes. The surviving Coalition ships were fleeing in all directions, their perfect formation completely shattered. The Void Hunters let them go, apparently satisfied with their victory. In less than 4 hours, the greatest fleet ever assembled had been destroyed. The Void Hunters had lost maybe a dozen ships, while the Coalition had lost 10,000. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. Exactly as Jake had predicted. As the command ship limped toward the nearest safe harbor, Jake stared at the empty space where the fleet had been. The aliens around him were in shock, unable to understand what had happened. But Jake understood. The Void Hunters had not been fighting a battle. They had been conducting a test, learning how the Coalition fought, studying their weaknesses, and now they knew everything they needed to know. The emergency meeting took place on Station Alpha 7, a massive space station that served as the Coalition's backup command center. The surviving alien leaders sat around a circular table, their various forms showing clear signs of shock and confusion. Some stared at empty space, others made nervous sounds, and a few kept checking their communication devices as if hoping for good news that would never come. Jake stood at the back of the room again, but this time it was different. The aliens. glanced at him nervously, as if they were starting to realize that the quiet human might have something important to say. Captain Park sat at the table now, no longer ignored, but not quite accepted either. Admiral Zexton looked different then. Before, his crystal form had lost its shine, and several small cracks ran along his surface. The defeat at Kepler Junction had broken something inside him. "We lost 10,000 ships," he said in a voice that sounded like grinding glass. 10,000. Ships destroyed in 4 hours. Commander Veltar's liquid form kept changing shape, unable to settle into his usual confident posture. "The weapons they used, we have never seen anything like them. Our shields were useless. Our armor meant nothing. They erased our ships from existence." Admiral Kethmer clicked his mandibles together rapidly, a sign of extreme stress in his species. The mathematics made no sense. 4-to-1 odds in our favor should have guaranteed victory, but mathematics failed us. Other surviving commanders made similar complaints. The Gornak's representative, a creature that looked like a walking boulder, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Our fortress ships have never been destroyed so easily. These void hunters fight with no honor, no respect for the proper way of war." The Valtari delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a metal suit, flickered with agitation. "They ignored our surrender signals. They showed no mercy to disabled ships. This is barbaric behavior." Jake listened to their complaints with growing frustration. They still did not understand what they were facing. They kept talking about honor and proper warfare, as if the Void Hunters cared about such things. Finally, he stepped forward. "May I speak?" he asked quietly. The room fell silent. Admiral Zexton looked at him with what might have been curiosity. "You wish to address the Council, human?" "Yes, sir. I have been observing the Void Hunters since this war began. I think I understand what we are dealing with." Commander Veltar. Form rippled with what Jake had learned with skepticism. "You understand what we, with thousands of years of military experience, cannot comprehend?" Jake nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. Because you have been thinking of them as soldiers. But they are not soldiers. They are hunters." He walked to the large display screen at the front of the room and called up the star map showing all the Void Hunter attacks. The red dots marking destroyed systems formed a clear pattern when viewed from the right angle. "Look at this," Jake said, manipulating the display to show the attacks in chronological order. "You see random destruction, but there is a pattern here. Every attack was planned, every target was chosen for a specific reason." Admiral Kethmer leaned forward, his insect eyes focusing on the display. "Explain." Jake highlighted different groups of destroyed systems. The first attacks were against isolated colonies, places with small populations and weak defenses. The Void Hunters were not trying to conquer territory. They were testing your response times, learning how your fleets moved. He showed the next series of attacks. Then they hit mining stations and supply depots. Not because they wanted the resources, but because they wanted to see how you protected your logistics. They learned that you always send the same type of ships to defend the same type of targets. The room was completely quiet now. Even the nervous sounds had stopped as the alien commanders focused on Jake's words. "The third wave hit your communication relays and sensor stations," Jake continued. "They were mapping your information networks, learning how you coordinate your forces. By the time they finished, they knew exactly how your military worked." Captain Park spoke up. "And Kepler Junction?" Jake nodded toward her. "Kepler Junction was the final test. They wanted to see your best tactics, your most powerful weapons, your strongest ships. They let you choose the battlefield, let you bring everything you had, and then they studied how you fought." Commander Veltar's form shifted nervously. "You are saying they plan to lose ships in that battle?" "I am saying they plan to learn from that battle," Jake corrected. "The ships they lost were a small price to pay for the knowledge they gained. Now they know everything about how you fight, how you think, how you react under pressure. Admiral. Sexton made a sound like breaking crystal. If this is true, then we are doomed. They know all our secrets. Jake shook his head. They know your secrets, but they do not know ours. What do you mean? Admiral Kethmer asked. Jake manipulated the display again, showing the battle at Kepler Junction from a different angle. During the battle, I recorded everything. I watched how the Void Hunters moved, how they attacked, how they coordinated their ships. And I saw something you missed. He slowed down the footage and highlighted the enemy ship movements. Look at how they attack. Perfect coordination, but not through technology. Watch the patterns. The aliens studied the display as Jake pointed out details they had missed during the chaos of battle. They move like a pack, he said. Like wolves hunting together. Each ship knows what the others will do without being told. It is not communication, it is instinct. Captain Park leaned forward. You think they are a hive mind? No, Jake said. I think they are pack hunters. On Earth, we had animals that hunted the same way. Wolves, as I said, but also others. They worked together perfectly, but they were still individuals. The pack had a leader, probably the strongest hunter, and the others followed. Admiral Sexton's cracked surface reflected the light strangely. How does this help us? Jake smiled for the first time since the battle. Because humans know how to hunt pack hunters. We have been doing it for thousands of years. You have been fighting them like they are an army, but armies can be defeated by bigger armies. Packs are different. Packs can be trapped. He brought up new displays showing Earth's history. My species survived on a planet full of predators. We were not the strongest or the fastest, but we learned to think differently. We learned that the best way to defeat a predator is to make it think it is hunting you, when really you are hunting it. Commander Veltar's form stopped shifting. You have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan, Jake corrected. But I need your help to make it work. And you need to be willing to fight in a way you have never fought before. Admiral Kethmer clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. What do you need? Jake looked around the room at the defeated alien commanders. I need you to stop thinking like generals and start thinking like prey, because that is what the Void Hunters expect. They have studied your military tactics, your battle formations, your standard responses. They think they know how you will react to any situation. He paused, letting his words sink in. But they have never fought humans. They do not know how we think, how we fight, how we survive. They are expecting to face another army of noble warriors following the rules of civilized warfare. Captain Park smiled, understanding what Jake was suggesting. But we are not going to give them what they expect. Jake nodded. We are going to give them something they have never seen before. We are going to show them what happens when prey becomes predator. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Admiral Sexton spoke. What do you need from us? Jake looked at each of the alien commanders in turn. I need you to trust me. I need you to let humans plan the next battle. And I need you to be ready to fight in a way that your ancestors would not recognize. Admiral Kethmer's mandibles clicked rapidly. This is highly irregular. No single species has ever commanded coalition forces. No single species has ever defeated the Void Hunters either, Jake replied calmly. You can keep doing things the way you always have, and keep losing. Or you can try something new. Commander Veltar's form rippled with what might have been hope. What makes you think your way will work? Jake smiled grimly. Because the Void Hunters think they are the apex predators in this galaxy. They have never met a species that evolved by being both predator and prey. They are about to learn that the most dangerous hunter is the one that looks like prey until it is too late. 3 weeks later, the human fleet gathered at the edge of the Helios system. 800 ships floated in the darkness between stars. looking small and insignificant compared to the mighty armadas the Coalition usually assembled. The alien. Observers watched from a safe distance, clearly doubting that such a modest force could succeed where their massive fleet had failed. Admiral Tony Reeves stood on the bridge of the UES Washington, studying the tactical displays. His ship was nothing special to look at, just another human cruiser with gray metal hull and basic weapons. But Jake had spent weeks preparing Reeves and his officers for what was coming. "The Void Hunters will arrive in approximately 2 hours," Jake reported from his position at the sensor station. Long-range scouts confirm they are using the same formation patterns as before. Admiral Reeves nodded calmly. He was a quiet man like many human commanders, preferring to think before speaking. "All ships begin Phase 1 deployment. Remember, no heroics, no grand gestures. We are not here to win glory." Captain Amy Chun acknowledged from her destroyer USS Phoenix. "Understood, Admiral. My squadron is moving to the asteroid field. We will be invisible until you give the word." Commander Rick Santos checked in from his position near the gas giant Helios Prime. Cruiser squadron taking position behind the gravity well, ready to use the planet's mass as a slingshot when needed. The alien observers watched in confusion as the human ships scattered across 3 star systems instead of forming battle lines. Admiral Zexton, whose crystal form still showed cracks from the previous defeat, spoke to Captain Park over the communication link. "I do not understand this deployment," the Zerathi leader said. "Your ships are spread out, vulnerable. When the enemy arrives, they will destroy you one group at a time." Captain Park smiled. "That is what they will think. But appearances can be deceiving." Jake had been working with the human fleet commanders for weeks, teaching them everything. He had learned about Void Hunter tactics. Unlike the aliens who saw patterns and tried to counter them with bigger patterns, the humans focused on breaking patterns entirely. The asteroid field where Chun's destroyers hid was not really an asteroid field. Half of the rocks were actually human ships with advanced camouflage systems, invisible to most sensors. The gas giant that Santos's cruisers orbited had been seeded with automated weapons platforms that looked like natural phenomena. Most importantly, every human ship was equipped with new communication systems that used quantum entanglement instead of radio waves. The Void Hunters had learned to jam traditional communications, but they had never encountered this technology before. When the Void Hunter fleet arrived, they came in the same coordinated formation that had worked so well at Kepler Junction. 3,000 dark ships moving like a single organism, their hulls absorbing light and making them hard to see against the star field. Jake watched them approach and felt a moment of doubt. The enemy ships looked just as terrifying as before, just as invincible. But then he remembered his grandfather's stories about old Earth wars, about soldiers who had faced impossible odds and won by being smarter rather than stronger. "Here they come," Admiral Reeves said quietly. "All ships maintain radio silence. Use quantum channels only." The Void Hunters scanned the system and found scattered human ships, apparently caught off guard and trying to retreat. It looked like easy prey, exactly the kind of target they had been successfully hunting for months. The first Void Hunter squadron moved toward Chun's destroyers in the asteroid field, their dark weapons charged up, ready to erase the human ships from existence. They had done this so many times before that it had become routine. But this time was different. The asteroids that had been hiding Chun's ships suddenly exploded outward, revealing themselves to be camouflaged human vessels. The destroyers opened fire from point-blank range, their weapons already locked onto the Void Hunter ships. The enemy had expected to be hunting scattered prey, but instead found themselves surrounded by predators. The first Void Hunter squadron tried to retreat, but more hidden ships revealed themselves. Chun had positioned her forces in a 3-dimensional maze, turning the asteroid field into a deadly trap. Every escape route led to another ambush. "First blood to us," Chun reported. Over the quantum channel, enemy squadron taking heavy damage. They are trying to signal for help, but the Void Hunters discovered that their communications were being jammed by human electronic warfare systems. Jake had studied their previous battles and learned how they coordinated their attacks. Now that coordination was broken, the main Void Hunter fleet moved to help their trapped squadron, but Santos's cruisers were ready for them. Using the gravity well of Helios Prime as a slingshot, the human ships accelerated to incredible speeds and struck the enemy formation from an unexpected angle. This was nothing like the orderly battle lines the Void Hunters had faced before. The humans fought in 3 dimensions, using planets and moons and asteroids as weapons. They appeared from behind cover, struck hard, and disappeared again before the enemy could respond. Jake watched the battle unfold on his screens and felt a fierce satisfaction. The Void Hunters' perfect coordination was breaking down as they faced an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. Human ships appeared and vanished like ghosts, striking from directions the enemy had not thought to guard. "They are trying to form a defensive circle," Santos reported. "Standard pack behavior when under attack." Admiral Reeves smiled grimly. "Then we give them what pack hunters fear most: isolation." The human fleet had been practicing this maneuver for weeks. Instead of attacking the Void Hunter formation as a whole, they targeted individual ships, cutting them off from their packmates. Alone, the dark vessels were still dangerous, but they lost the perfect coordination that made them so deadly. Captain Chien's destroyers used hit-and-run tactics, appearing long enough to damage a single enemy ship before vanishing back into the asteroid field. Santos's cruisers worked in pairs, using the gravity wells of different planets to bounce between targets faster than the Void Hunters could track. The enemy tried to adapt, but every time they changed tactics, the humans changed. 2. There were no rigid formations to predict, no standard responses to counter. The human commanders made decisions in real time, adapting to whatever the Void Hunters tried. "Enemy fleet is beginning to panic," Jake reported, watching the sensor displays. "Their formations are falling apart. Ships are firing at shadows, hitting their own vessels by mistake." For the first time in their campaign of terror, the Void Hunters were experiencing fear. They had been the ultimate predators, always knowing exactly what their prey would do. But humans were unlike any prey they had ever encountered. Admiral Reeves opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All ships, begin Phase 3. Time to show them what happens when the prey becomes the predator." The scattered human ships suddenly converged on the Void Hunter fleet from every direction. Not in straight lines that could be predicted, but in chaotic spirals that used every piece of cover in the system. They came from behind planets, from inside nebula clouds, from the shadows of moons. The Void Hunters found themselves trapped in the center of a closing net. Every escape route was blocked by human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. Their weapons, so effective against the orderly alien formations, struggled to target enemies that moved like dancers instead of soldiers. Jake watched as the enemy fleet's perfect coordination finally collapsed completely. Individual ships tried to flee, abandoning their packmates in desperation. Others fired wildly in all directions, as likely to hit friends as enemies. The hunters had become the hunted, and they did not know how to deal with it. 18 hours. Admiral Reeves said as the last Void Hunter ship was destroyed or captured. From first contact to complete victory in 18 hours. The alien observers watching from the edge of the system were silent for a long moment. Finally, Admiral Zexton's voice came over the communication channel, filled with something that might have been wonder. "How?" was all he said. Jake smiled as he looked at the battlefield where human tactics had completely dismantled an enemy that had seemed invincible. "We stopped fighting their war and made them fight ours." The interrogation chamber aboard the human command ship was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. Jake sat across from the captured Void Hunter commander, studying the alien creature that had terrorized the galaxy for months. The being looked like a cross between a shark and a spider, with sleek black skin and too many eyes that never seemed to blink. The prisoner had been silent for 3 days, refusing to speak despite the translator devices that would allow communication. But Jake was patient. He had learned patience from watching the alien commanders make their mistakes, and he would not repeat them now. Captain Park stood beside him, along with several alien observers who had insisted on witnessing the interrogation. Admiral Zexthan's crystal form flickered with curiosity, while Commander Veltar's liquid shape rippled with nervous energy. They all wanted answers about this enemy that had seemed so unstoppable. "You do not have to speak," Jake said quietly to the Void Hunter. "But I will tell you what I have learned about your species anyway." The alien's multiple eyes focused on him, but it remained silent. Jake activated a holographic display, showing the star map with all the attack patterns. "You are not invaders. You are scouts. Everything you did, every system you destroyed, was preparation for something much larger." One of the alien's eyes twitched slightly, but it still said nothing. "Your species evolved as pack hunters on a world where cooperation meant survival," Jake continued. "You learned to work together perfectly, to coordinate without words, to hunt as a single organism. It made you the apex predators on your homeworld." Commander Veltar's form shifted nervously. "How can you know this?" Jake glanced at the Mulgrim commander. "Because I studied how they fight. Every movement, every tactic, every decision they made was based on pack hunting instincts. They were not trying to conquer territory or capture resources. They were clearing the way for their main fleet." Admiral Zexthan's crystal surface caught the light as he leaned forward. "Main fleet?" The Void Hunter commander finally spoke, its voice a harsh whisper that the translators turned into understandable words. "You know nothing, soft creatures. The hunt fleet numbers in the millions. We were merely the advanced scouts, testing your defenses and mapping your weaknesses." Jake nodded calmly. "I thought so. Your attacks were too methodical, too focused on gathering information rather than causing maximum damage. You were preparing a detailed report for your commanders." The alien's eyes glittered with what might have been respect. "You understand tactics better than the others. But understanding will not save you. The hunt fleet will arrive in cycles. And when it does, your scattered worlds will fall like wounded prey." Captain Park stepped forward. "When will they arrive?" The Void Hunter made a sound that might have been laughter. "Soon enough. You destroyed my scouts, but the information they gathered was already transmitted home. The hunt fleet knows everything about your weapons, your ships, your tactics. They will adapt accordingly." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression calm. "How many ships?" "More than your mind can comprehend, small hunter. The hunt fleet contains every warrior of our species, every ship we have built in 1,000 cycles of expansion. We have conquered 47 galaxies. Yours will be the 48th. The alien observers looked at each other with growing fear. Admiral Kethmer's mandibles clicked rapidly as he tried to calculate the odds. Millions of ships? That is impossible to defeat. But Jake was thinking about something else. "You said they have conquered 47 galaxies. What happened to the species that lived there?" The Void Hunter's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "They became prey, as you will become prey. The strong survived to serve us, the weak were consumed. It is the natural order." Jake stood up and walked to the display, manipulating it to show the local galactic cluster. "But you made a mistake this time. You encountered something you have never faced before." "And what is that?" the alien asked mockingly. "A species that evolved to be both predator and prey," Jake replied. "You have conquered galaxies full of species that were either hunters or hunted, but never both. You do not know how to fight an enemy that can think like you do." The Void Hunter was quiet for a moment, its multiple eyes studying Jake with new interest. "You believe you can defeat the Hunt fleet with your small tricks?" Jake smiled. "I believe we can teach others to fight the way we do." Your scouts spent months studying how the Coalition fights, but they never studied how humans fight. Now we have months to prepare for your main fleet. He turned to the alien observers. "This is not a hopeless situation. The Void Hunters are powerful, but they have weaknesses. They depend on perfect coordination, on knowing what their enemies will do. If we can break that coordination, make them fight in ways they do not expect, we can win." Admiral Zexthan's crystal form brightened slightly. "You have a plan for fighting millions of ships?" "I have the beginning of a plan," Jake corrected. "But it will require every species in the Coalition to learn new ways of fighting. No more grand formations, no more predictable tactics, no more fighting for honor and glory." Commander Veltar's liquid shape rippled with hope. "What do you need?" Jake looked around the room at the assembled alien commanders. "I need time to train your fleets. I need your shipyards to build new types of vessels designed for the tactics we will use. And I need every species to share their unique abilities so we can combine them in ways the Void Hunters cannot predict." The Void Hunter commander made that harsh laughing sound again. "You think your prey animals can learn to hunt? It is not in their nature." Jake turned back to the alien prisoner. "That is where you are wrong. Every species in this galaxy has survival instincts. They have just forgotten how to use them because they have been civilized for so long. But humans remember. And we can teach them to remember too." He activated another display showing the recent battle. "Your scouts were perfect pack hunters, but they had never faced prey that hunted back. When we broke their coordination, when we made them fight as individuals instead of a pack, they fell apart." The alien's eyes narrowed. "The Hunt fleet will not make the same mistakes." "No," Jake agreed. "They will make new mistakes. Because no matter how many galaxies you have conquered, you have never fought a war where the prey refuses to act like prey." Captain Park stepped forward. "How long do we have?" The Void Hunter was silent for a long moment, then seemed to decide that the information no longer mattered. 6 cycles by your measurements. The Hunt fleet moves slowly, bringing supply ships and construction vessels to establish permanent bases in conquered territory." Jake nodded grimly. 6 months. That should be enough time. Admiral Kefmer's mandibles clicked nervously. "Enough time for what?" Jake looked at each of the alien commanders in turn. "Enough time to turn this entire galaxy into a trap. The Void Hunters expect to find scattered, frightened prey when they arrive. Instead, they are going to find something they have never encountered before, which is..." Commander Veltar asked. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. "An entire galaxy that has learned to hunt." Over the following weeks, the Coalition underwent a transformation unlike anything in its history. Human advisors worked with every species, teaching them the tactics that had defeated the Void Hunter scouts. The rigid military hierarchies that had existed for millennia were replaced with flexible command structures that could adapt quickly to changing situations. The Zirathi learned to use their crystal ships as mirrors, reflecting and amplifying human stealth technology. The Mulgrim discovered that their liquid forms could reshape their vessels mid-battle, creating configurations the enemy could never predict. The Kavek used their mathematical abilities to calculate probability chains for chaotic tactics. Jake worked 18 hours a day, traveling between different worlds and fleets, sharing everything he had learned about the Void Hunters. But more importantly, he was learning from the alien species, discovering capabilities they had never thought to use in warfare. The galaxy was preparing for the greatest battle in its history. And for the first time since the Void Hunters had appeared, the defenders were not afraid. They were ready to show these galactic conquerors what happened when prey evolved into predators. The Hunt fleet was coming, but it would not find the same galaxy the scouts had mapped. It would find something new, something dangerous, something that had learned to bite back out in the depths of space. A quiet human continued to watch and plan, knowing that the real war was just beginning.